The morning fog covered the white walls of Gondor like a cold blanket hiding the world in silence. Only the sound of hooves broke that silence. Slow, steady hooves from a single horse, a lone rider approached the eastern gate, his cloak torn and his boots muddy as if he had walked through fire and ash. The guards at the gate stepped forward, hands on sword hilts, their eyes watching every move. The rider stopped in front of them and said nothing, not a word, not a nod, not even a sound. His horse was tired ribs, showing eyes wide with fear, as if it had seen something no animal should ever see. The captain of the guard asked for his name. The rider remained silent. He looked up at the white tower standing tall behind the walls of the city. His eyes were not empty, but filled with something ancient, something heavy without a word. He reached into his cloak and showed a token. A small silver disc, shaped like a tear, with a symbol no one recognized. The guards looked at each other, unsure, but something in the man's face told them this was no ordinary wanderer. They opened the gate as the rider entered Minas Tirith. People stared from windows and doorways. He moved slowly through the stone streets, passing shops and soldiers and children at play, but no one dared to speak to him. The baker stopped kneading his dough. The blacksmith paused mid-hammer. Even the birds grew quiet as he passed. He made his way to the lower quarter and sat outside an old tavern. He did not drink, he did not speak, he just watched. Whispers spread quickly. They called him the Ghost Rider, the Lost Son, the Man from the North. No one knew where he had come from or why he was here, but every time someone tried to ask, he only stared at them, cold and calm and quiet. On the third day, a young girl named Alira walked up to him with a piece of bread. She was thin and hungry herself, but she had seen the sadness in his eyes. She offered the bread without a word. For the first time, the rider moved. He took the bread gently and whispered, "Do not trust the light on the third night." Then he ate the bread in silence. Alira ran home, heart pounding. What did he mean? What light? Why the third night? That same night, strange lights danced above the white tower, green and gold, and flickering like fireflies. Caught in a storm, people gathered to watch, but no one could explain it. The steward of Gondor laughed it off, said it was just the moon playing tricks, but some were not so sure. That evening, a boy named Kalen followed the rider from a distance. He wanted to see where the man went at night. The rider walked through alleys and old roads. He stopped at the fountain court and stood before the white tree of Gondor. Kalen hid behind a statue and watched the tree's leaves glowed faintly. And then, the rider did something strange. He placed his hand on a stone near the base of the tree. The stone pulsed with light just once, and then went dark. Kalen gasped. The rider turned. But his shadow turned the other way. Kalen ran the next morning. The rider was gone. His cloak left folded on the bench outside the tavern, but that same silver disc was now nailed to the tavern door. The symbol burned into the wood, like fire. Alira picked it up and hid it in her pocket. She felt it was important, felt it was dangerous, felt like it was meant for her. She told no one that night. The lights returned brighter this time, and a shadow moved across the wall of the steward's chambers. Though no one was inside, the guards reported hearing whispers in old tongues. The steward grew angry and ordered the guards to find the rider, but no one knew where to look. Alira sat alone with the silver disc in her hand. It felt warm, it pulsed like a heartbeat. She whispered, "Who are you?" And in her mind, a voice answered, "Soon you will know." Alira walked through the quiet streets of Gondor, her hands wrapped in a thin cloth, holding the silver disc she had found. Near the old tavern, the city was waking up. Merchants shouting, boys running, guards marching, but her thoughts were far from all that. She could still hear his voice inside her mind. Do not trust the light on the third night. She had not told anyone, not even her friend Miran, who always asked too many questions. Alira felt something strange around the disc, like it was watching her or listening to her. When she held it under moonlight, it glowed for just a second. Not bright, but enough to scare her. Still, she did not throw it away. That afternoon, she returned to the tavern where she had first seen the rider. His seat was still there, empty, as if waiting for him. She sat down and stared at the place where he once rested his hands. Then, without thinking, she whispered, "Where are you?" A soft wind blew through the alley. She looked around but saw no one. Suddenly the disc in her pocket grew warm. She pulled it out and it pulsed with light. Then she heard it. Not from outside, but inside her mind, a voice calm, deep, and filled with sorrow, followed the sound of stone crying. Kylara stood up quickly, heart pounding. She had no idea what that meant. She walked through the lower streets, looking at stones, watching fountains, listening to the city. Then she heard it, a faint sound like something dripping like water, falling onto rock. Again and again she followed the sound through a narrow passage behind the baker's shop. There, hidden between two walls, was a broken statue, with water leaking from its eyes. The stone was crying. She reached forward and touched it. The ground beneath her shifted. A small part of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden stairway. Elira stepped back in fear, but the disc in her hand pulsed again, as if pushing her forward. She took a deep breath and walked into the dark. The stairs led down into old stone tunnels, lit by faint green light coming from glowing moss on the walls. She walked slowly, footsteps echoing. There were carvings all around, old words in languages she could not read. Drawings of battles, of monsters, of kings, and of a man standing alone with a burning sword. Then she saw him. The rider. He stood near an old gate carved from black stone. He did not look surprised to see her. He simply nodded and stepped aside, letting her pass. Behind the gate was a room filled with mirrors, but none of them showed her reflection. Instead, each mirror showed a different place in Gondor: the tower, the tree, the throne room, and even her own house. She turned to him and asked, "What is this?" He answered, "They watch, they wait, they remember." She looked at the mirrors again and saw figures moving in them. Shadowy things with no faces but long arms reaching. She turned away, frightened. He placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Only you can carry the warning." She asked, "Why me?" He replied, "Because you gave bread." Suddenly the mirrors cracked, and the room shook. The rider grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the chamber. Just as the gate slammed shut, he handed her a scroll. It was old and sealed with wax, shaped like a sword. "Take it to the white tree. Place it at the roots." On the third night she asked, "What will happen?" He said, "Either Gondor will wake, or Gondor will burn." Then he vanished into the dark like a shadow swallowed by the walls. Elira ran back up the stairs, clutching the scroll, her hands shaking. When she reached the surface, the sun was setting. People looked at her, but she said nothing that night. She hid the scroll under her bed. She could not sleep. The disc glowed beside her like a second heart. She felt the city was breathing differently, like something was coming closer, and above her, the stars blinked out one by one. Elira woke before the sun touched the towers of Gondor. The scroll lay hidden beneath her bed, wrapped in cloth tied with string, but even through the layers, she felt its weight. It was not heavy like a rock, it was heavy like a secret. She stepped outside into the morning mist, the silver disc tied around her neck and hidden under her tunic. Birds flew across the sky, but their songs were quieter than usual. The city itself felt strange, like it was holding its breath. Elira walked to the fountain court, where the white tree stood tall and silent. She walked past guards, past nobles, past servants. No one noticed her, or perhaps they chose not to. She knelt near the roots of the white tree and looked at the stone she had seen the rider touch. It was darker than the others, rougher, colder. She placed her hand on it. The stone pulsed once, then a crack appeared across its surface. Elira gasped and stepped back. The stone split open like an egg, and inside was something unexpected. Not a jewel, not a sword, but a folded map drawn on silver leaf, glowing faintly with symbols that moved on their own. She pulled it out, and the crack in the stone sealed behind her. She held the map in the sunlight and watched as lines shifted and shimmered, tunnels, chambers, hidden paths beneath the city, and at the very center, a circle marked with fire. She heard footsteps behind her and quickly hid the map in her satchel. It was Mirren, her friend. He looked nervous. "I saw you go into the stone path yesterday. Why didn't you tell me?" Elira tried to brush it off, but he insisted. "You are hiding something. I saw your shadow stretch like his." She froze. "You saw the rider?" Mira nodded only once. But he was speaking to someone in a mirror that showed your face. Illyra pulled him close. Listen, you cannot tell anyone, not yet something bad is coming, and I have to stop it. Mirren frowned, but agreed. Together they went to an old part of the city where ruins from the First Age still stood there. They compared the map to the carvings. On the wall, some of the symbols matched. One especially caught Illyra's eye. A mark like a flame trapped in a circle. She touched it, and the wall behind the carving slid open. Behind it was a passage. No one had walked in for ages. Dust fell from the ceiling as they entered. Their torches flickered against old stone. Bones lay scattered near the entrance. Mirren stepped back in fear, but Illyra moved forward. She felt drawn. Like the scroll and the disc and the map were all calling to the same place. Deeper they went, until they reached a room with no doors, no windows, just a circle of stones. And in the middle, a pedestal. On it was another disc like hers, but cracked and blackened. She placed her own disc next to it, and the ground shook. A symbol appeared on the wall. It showed a man standing against a beast with many eyes. Above the man was a girl, holding a torch. Below them was Gondor burning. Illyra stared at the image. It was not just a warning. It was a choice: light, or fire, hope, or ruin. She took both discs and the scroll and turned to leave, but the way they came had collapsed. Rocks blocked the entrance. Mirren shouted for help, but no one answered. Then from the darkness behind them came a sound. Metal dragging claws clicking, a whisper that made their skin freeze. The rider appeared, but he looked different, older, his eyes full of pain. He spoke. You opened the path. Now you must carry the burden. Illyra stepped forward and asked, what is the fire circle on the map? He answered, it is the heart of Gondor, and it is waking. He touched the wall and it melted like wax, revealing a secret stairway leading upward. Illyra and Mirren followed him in silence. When they reached the surface, night had fallen. And above the white tower, the stars blinked again, this time faster. As if counting down to something. Illyra knew she had 2 nights left. The wind howled through the streets of Gondor that night, as if the city itself had started to whisper. Illyra stood at the edge of the citadel, looking at the Tower of Icthelion, its white stone glowing under the pale moon. She held the silver map tight in her hand, and the scroll pressed against her chest. Beside her stood Mirren, his face pale, his hands shaking. They had returned from the hidden chamber below the ruins, but neither of them could sleep. The map had revealed something else after the quake. Another line, another symbol, one that pointed directly under the tower itself. Illyra knew they had to go, even if it meant sneaking past the guards, even if it meant walking straight into the war. Oldest part of the city where only the dead remembered the stones. They moved silently through shadowed alleys, past sleeping dogs, and flickering lanterns at the base of the white tower. Behind a broken statue of a forgotten king, they found the place. A stone slab carved with the same fire circle symbol. Illyra placed the cracked disc into a groove at the center of the stone. A faint hum filled the air. The ground shifted and the slab slid open, revealing a spiral stair made of black rock. Going down into darkness, they looked at each other. The stairs felt endless, each step colder than the last. The walls were covered in carvings, but these were different from the ones they had seen before. These showed creatures not of this world, long arms, sharp teeth, wings of ash, and among them always stood one man. The rider again and again, he faced them alone. When they reached the bottom, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. Air was thick with dust and something older than dust. In the smell of metal, a smell of old fire. Center of the chamber stood a round gate made of stone and bones. It pulsed with a deep red glow. On its surface was the fire circle, bigger than before. Moving alive, Mirren stepped back. We should not be here. Illyra nodded, but she stepped closer. Her disc began to shake. The scroll in her hand grew warm. She placed the scroll on a stone table. Near the gate, it opened by itself. Words wrote themselves in light across the air. It is not sealed. He is not dead. He only waits behind them. A voice spoke. Not loud, not soft, but full of weight. He dreams in chains, and you carry the key. The rider stood there. His body looked weaker now, like something was draining him. His eyes glowed faint blue. Elira asked, "What is behind the gate?" He said, "The first flame. The one we buried to save the world." Miran asked, "Why not destroy it?" The rider looked at him and said, "Because it is alive." The walls around them began to hum. The bones in the gate trembled. The fire circle turned faster. The rider walked to Elira and handed her a dagger, old, black, curved, forged in silence. "If he wakes, uses on me before he takes me again." She held the dagger with shaking hands. "You mean the creature?" He nodded. Before she could speak more, the ground cracked. From behind the gate came a roar, a sound made of wind and fire and sorrow. A piece of the ceiling fell. The chamber shook. Miran pulled Elira back, but the rider stepped forward. He placed both discs into the gate. The roar stopped. The glow faded. The gate turned still. He looked at them. "You bought us a day, maybe to use them." Suddenly, the gate pulled the rider forward. Chains shot out and wrapped around him. He did not fight. He smiled, and then he was gone. Elira screamed, but nothing moved. The scroll was now blank. The discs turned to ash. They ran back up the stairs, back into the moonlight, back into a city, still asleep, still breathing, still unaware. Elira stood under the white tree. She looked at the stars. They blinked again, only 5 left. Now the countdown had begun. The second night fell heavy over Gondor, and the stars above blinked slower than before. Elira stood near the broken statue where she had first entered the secret stairway. Her hands were shaking, and her thoughts were heavy. The rider was gone, swallowed by the gate below. The scroll had gone blank. The discs had turned to ash, but the map had changed again. New lines, new signs. One path pulsed like blood on a page, and it led to the deepest chamber yet. Miran met her near the old stone garden. He carried 2 lanterns and a dagger. Neither of them spoke. They both knew this night would be worse than the last. They entered the tunnel again, through a different passage. The map guided them through places untouched for centuries. Spiderwebs, thick as ropes. Skeletons wrapped in forgotten cloaks. Carvings that moved when they were not looking. They reached a narrow corridor, filled with black roots, pulsing like veins. At the end of it was a sealed door shaped like a ribcage. Elira placed her hand on it. The fire circle glowed, and the door opened with a sound that made the air cry. The chamber inside was cold, and wet chains stretched across the floor like rivers of iron. And in the center, a creature knelt on its knees, surrounded by a ring of runes. Its body was thin, made of smoke and bone. Its face was hidden behind a broken mask. Its hands were bound by chains that moved on their own. It was not asleep, it was waiting. Elira stepped forward, and the creature turned its head. Though it had no eyes, she felt its gaze press against her skin. "Child of the city, you bring the old blood, you carry the spark." Its voice echoed through the chamber, not from its mouth, but from the walls, the floor, the chains. Miran raised his dagger, but Elira held him back. "What are you?" she asked. "I am the firstborn from the ashes of the flame. I am the breath before fire. I am what they feared to become." It stood, the chains groaned. The runes on the floor flickered. Elira stepped back, but the creature did not attack. Instead, it held out its hand. In it was a small object, a ring made of stone. "Take it and the lie. Open the flame and let the truth burn." She did not take it. Instead, she looked into the runes. There were words in the old tongue, words she could now read. The map had taught her the flame must sleep, the chain must bind, the bearer must choose. She looked at the ring again. She remembered the mirrors, the voices, the way her shadow had shifted since the first night. She asked, "Why me? Why my blood?" The creature smiled. "Or perhaps it only shifted its face because you still believe in choice." Suddenly the chamber shook. The chains tightened. The door behind them slammed shut. The creature screamed a name. It was not a word, but a feeling, the kind of name that breaks glass and makes bones ache. Miran fell to the floor, covering his ears. Elira held her ground, the runes lit up, and a ghostly image appeared beside her. The rider, but he was fading. He spoke fast. "Do not take the ring. It binds you to him. He will rise through your voice, your eyes, your breath." The creature laughed. It was a sound made of fire and sorrow. The image of the rider knelt. "Please, Elira." Remember the tree is the last seal." Then he vanished, the chamber darkened. The creature dropped the ring. Its chains flared with light. It screamed one more time and was pulled back to the center. Illyra grabbed Mirren and ran to the wall. She pressed the map against the stone. A new path opened behind a carved lion. They escaped into another tunnel. As they climbed the stairs, Illyra looked back. Once the creature was no longer there. Only the ring remained spinning slowly. When they reached the surface, the air was colder than before. The moon was red. The white tree had lost another branch. Illyra fell to her knees. She knew what was coming. One night left, one choice to make. The third day began with bells ringing across Gondor. But not for battle, and not for warning. They rang for celebration. An elven envoy had arrived. Dressed in silver robes, riding horses that shimmered like starlight, they entered the city gates with grace and smiles. The people cheered. The nobles gathered. Even the steward himself came down from the tower to greet them. But Illyra felt something wrong. She stood in the crowd, her hand gripping the map hidden beneath her cloak. Beside her, Mirren whispered that something felt cold, even though the sun was high. The leader of the envoy was tall, with long pale hair and eyes too sharp to be kind. He called himself Lierith, and spoke of peace and honor and gifts. He brought an old relic, as tribute, a horn carved from white bone covered in gold. The people of Gondor cheered again, but Illyra looked in too. Lee raised eyes and saw the reflection of fire, not the sun. That evening, a feast was held in the great hall. Illyra and Mirren watched from the shadows near the stone pillars. They saw Lierith hand the steward a sealed letter. The steward read it in silence, then looked toward the white tree. His face grew pale, but he nodded. Illyra and Mirren followed one of the elves as he left the hall. He moved through hidden corridors and narrow stairs until he reached a door guarded by 2 soldiers with red sashes. The elf whispered a word, and the door opened. Inside the chamber was a circle of robed figures. Each held a candle that burned without smoke. On the floor was a symbol. The fire circle drawn in salt and ash. Illyra gasped, and the elf turned. He saw her. He smiled. "Welcome, child of the gate. We have waited long." Mirren pulled her back, and they ran. Guards chased them through the halls. Swords flashed, torches dropped. Illyra dropped the map, but kept the memory in her mind. They escaped through a servant tunnel and reached the outer court. There, the white tree stood still and silent. But now it was weeping. Golden sap dripped from its bark, and the wind around it was dry and bitter. Illyra placed her hand on the tree. Light burst from its roots. A voice spoke, not from the tree, but from the ground. "You must choose. Seal the fire, or let it rise." Suddenly, a hand grabbed her shoulder. It was the steward. His eyes were hollow. He said, "I did what I had to." They promised Gondor would live forever. Behind him, Lierith stepped into view. He held a blade of black crystal. "Your blood opens a flame. Your voice awakens the name." Illyra stepped back, but the circle had already begun to form beneath her feet. Mirren tried to reach her, but was thrown back by invisible force. Illyra looked up and screamed one word, "No." The wind stopped. The stars above blinked all at once, and the air cracked like glass. The ground split, and the roots of the white tree pulled apart. A stairway of stone rose from beneath. Lierith smiled and said, "The gate is open." Illyra fell to her knees, but then she saw something, a spark in the sap. A flicker of silver, the cracked disc. It was whole again, floating within the roots. She reached out and it flew into her hand. The fire stopped, the circle vanished. Lierith screamed as the blade in his hand turned to dust. The steward collapsed and wept. "Forgive me, I thought I was saving us." Illyra stood, her eyes now glowing faint with silver light. She said, "The flame does not want chains, but it does not want lies either." She walked toward the rising stair. The map returned to her hand. Not drawn on paper, but now burned into her skin. She turned to Mirren. "One more step, then it ends." He nodded and took her hand. Together, they stepped onto the path that led below the tree, below the tower, below the truth. Behind them, the sky cracked again, and far in the mountains, something ancient roared. The final night had begun. The final night had fallen over Gondor, and not a single soul could sleep. The stars above no longer blinked. They were gone. The sky had turned black, as if the world itself waited. Alira walked down the last stair, with Miran at her side. The stone steps led deep beneath the white tree, through roots thick as walls and older than kings. The silver disc pulsed in her hand with each heartbeat. It was no longer just a token, it was a key. The air grew colder with every step. The torches they carried refused to burn. Only the silver light from the disc guided them now. They entered a massive chamber carved in perfect circles. At its center stood a pillar of fire frozen in place. It did not burn. It hovered, waiting. Around it lay the remains of warriors from every age, their armor rusted, their swords broken. But their faces were calm, as if they had fallen not in battle, but in peace. Alira stepped forward, and the disc floated from her hand. It hovered above the frozen flame and began to spin. Miran whispered, "Is this the flame, the first flame?" She nodded. She could feel it now. Its sorrow, its rage, its longing. Then the shadows moved from every side of the chamber, came figures. The robed ones, the false elves, even the steward. Their eyes empty, their mouths chanting, they formed a circle. The final ritual had begun. Alira raised her hand. "Stop this. The flame does not belong to you. It does not belong to anyone." Lirith stepped from the darkness, his face twisted with anger. "You carry the old blood, you must choose. Open the flame or seal it forever." Alira looked at the frozen fire. She saw herself in it. A girl who gave bread to a stranger. A child who touched forgotten stone, a voice that shook a city. She closed her eyes and remembered the writer, his final words, "Seal the flame before he takes me again." She opened the scroll. The words had returned. "Burn the name or bear the chain." She placed the scroll into the fire. It burst into light. A scream echoed across the chamber. Lirith fell to his knees. The robed ones dropped their candles and vanished like dust. The flame pulsed once, twice, then rose, not in anger, not in destruction, but in truth. It showed her a memory, the day Gondor was founded, the first king holding the flame not as a weapon, but as a promise. Alira stepped into the light. Miran shouted, but could not reach her. The flame wrapped around her, but it did not burn. She spoke, "I will carry the name. I will carry the truth, and I will carry hope." The flame entered her. She fell silence. Above the chamber, the white tree bloomed. Its leaves turned silver, its branches reached the sky. And for the first time in 1,000 years, it sang. The sky above Gondor cleared, the stars returned. Brighter than ever, the steward awoke on the floor of the great hall. He looked out the window and wept. Alira opened her eyes. She stood alone. The chamber was gone, the flame was gone, only a path remained, a path made of light. She walked it and found herself beneath the white tree. The people of Gondor stood in silence. Even the guards dropped their spears. No one spoke until a child asked, "Who is she?" And the steward answered, "She is the one who remembered that hope is not given, it is chosen." Alira looked at the sky, then at her hands. The map was gone, the disc was gone, but the mark remained on her skin. A circle of fire, a circle of choice, and when the wind blew through the white tree, it whispered her name. Gondor would never forget the day it held its breath and was given back its soul.